Hello, how are you? It's been a minute since I've seen you, and I'm very, very apologetic for that. I have had quite a busy few weeks personally between my child's birthday, vacations, holidays, all sorts of things. I'm sure you can all relate. Few of you have had your own events in the past few weeks. So I'm sorry that I haven't touched base with you in a while, but here I am. I wanted to just touch base and catch you up on where I'm at. I have graded all of your resource responses for cycle 2, and I have read through all of your responses, and you've had some great conversations in there, and they've spurred me to want to tell you a story. So I will get to that shortly. I am still working on grading your hands-on experiences and your documentation pieces. So give me a little bit of time. I should have that to you by the end of the week at the very latest. I do like to take my time with your hands-on experiences to give you as much kind of food for thought as I can in the comments. So that takes me a little bit of time. And I do like to make sure that you're giving each other enough feedback in your peer reviews for the documentation piece. So give me a little bit of grace as I go through that and try and take my time and make sure that I'm reading through all of the work that you've done and honoring your time by doing that. I wanted to tell you a story, and then I'm going to just highlight a few of the things I did end up posting, the science nuggets I promised so long ago. In cycle 2, I posted them at the end and I added them for cycle 1 and cycle 2. And I'm going to just go through those kind of item by item, what's in there so that you know what's there. Again, it's all supplementary, but I think it's all relevant and related. And most of them are TED Talks, which are fun to watch if you're hanging out and wanting to watch something interesting. So the story I want to tell you is about my uncle. And the first year that I taught this course was 2021. And in the time frame that this class was going, my uncle passed away. And it was timely in such a way that I tell his story a lot in my classes to kind of tie things together and to give food for thought. So my uncle worked at JPL, and he worked on cameras primarily. When he first started, he was an assistant in a lab. My uncle did not have any higher education degrees. He did not go to college that I'm aware of. If he did, he took classes, but he did not earn any sort of degree. He started again as an assistant in a lab with interest in working with cameras and working with the tools and equipment that were there and the software that was there. And through the course of his career, he just kind of kept learning more and more and moving up in the lab to the point where he was actually building cameras. So my uncle worked on Cassini, he worked on the Curiosity rover, and he worked on Perseverance, specifically working on the cameras that went into those missions. The first black and white images that came back from Curiosity were from a camera that my uncle helped to build. The reason why I tell you about this story is, or about my uncle, is because growing up, I didn't ask a lot of questions. I knew that he worked at JPL. I knew that, he went with his friends and shot off rockets in the valleys and did crazy things that people that work with rockets and science do. I didn't really ask many questions, but a couple of years ago, maybe it was while he was working on Perseverance. I asked, how did you get into this? What happened? So I asked him to tell me the story, and I asked a little bit about what he was working on. And he told me how he went from being a lab assistant all the way up to working as a camera engineer, basically. Um, and then I asked what he was working on, and at the time he was working on Sherlock, which is a camera that is on Perseverance. So I've written my notes down because I always forget all these little details. So Sherlock is a camera, and it stands for Scanning Habitable Environments with Raman and Luminescence for Organic Materials. Basically, Sherlock is a camera and a spectrometer that was designed to go onto Perseverance to look in a giant crater to help them determine if there was ever water on Mars, which sounds very cool in my mind, just to wrap my head around what that tiny little thing is supposed to do. And at the time he was working on it, he was having, I said, so how's it going? And he said, it's not going very well at all. And I was like, oh, what's going on? And he was having a hard time getting it to work. He and his team, a lot of people working on it, they were having a hard time getting it to work. And I asked him, I said, well, what happens if you don't get it to work? What happens then? And he explained to me that they lose a lot of money, obviously. But part of the problem, or the reasoning why he was feeling so much of a crunch on himself and why he was stressing out about getting this thing to work, is that they were working on a timeline. So if you don't know about it, there's something called a Mars close approach. And the way that Mars and Earth orbit is they aren't on the same pathways. So there's a time frame that happens every 26 months, which is just a little over 2 years, where they are the closest that they are in their cycles together. And what they try to do on the missions that they've been doing to Mars is to go when that Mars close approach happens, so that they save time and money and fuel, and they make it as efficient as possible. And so basically in between missions, they have this 26-month period to get whatever done they need to get done before they can get back onto the rocket and go and do their thing. So they literally operate on a time crunch. So he was having to figure this out, but he was having to figure this out with his team in a very small, compacted period of time. And so that was one of the stressors that he was dealing with. And I tell this because I feel like his story has so much of the cycles and frameworks wrapped up into it that we can think about. I mean, thinking back to how he ended up where he was, working on these cameras and spectrometers from being a lab assistant. I mean, he literally built a career out of messing about with cameras and software and tools in a lab, which you can also fold in privilege, because he's a white cis male in a white cis system. And so that worked out for him. But he built his career based on messing about. And then by the time he got to the point where he was working on missions, he was very much in the design thinking framework, where they had a problem. They needed to create something very specific to do a very specific job on the rovers that were going, and they had a very tight time frame to do it. So he had to really get into creating prototypes. He had to get into quickly solving problems and quickly turning things around and quickly revisiting ideas and going through these cycles and kind of going back and forth between it all. So I use it as a tool to illustrate the different frameworks that exist in real world places. Because what happens a lot when we get to design thinking is we get tripped up on the product piece. And we tend to go to this place of we have to create something. it has to have this kind of, we get kind of this idea of perfection involved in what we're making, and we want it to look better, be better, and we want to use certain tools, and we have this idea of what it's supposed to be, or what typical STEM classroom settings would want us to think that it's supposed to be. But the truth is that it's born out of a curiosity and a desire to want to know more. So most of the time when we're going to see children going through these processes or needing to have that feedback on what they're working on, it's out of their own curiosity and their own interest in what they're doing. And so we might not end up with an end product. We might end with an end product. We might end with an end product that isn't what we thought it was going to be. It might shift through the process. Because if we're working collaboratively with a group of children or a group of individuals, no matter what situation we're in, we all have different ideas and different experiences and different perspectives to add in and input. Some of you in your reflections automatically went to thinking, this is how we design curriculum. This is how we create curriculum and provocations and things for the classroom. That's absolutely correct. Some of you questioned whether critical feedback is appropriate for children. And we're thinking specifically about children that were too critical of their own work, and thinking specifically about them not having that idea of perfection in the end. And I think that it's important to know the difference between criticism and critical feedback, where, thinking that there isn't a perfect end product is, and having some criticism of that not perfect end product versus giving feedback to get to the goal of what somebody is trying to get to satisfy a curiosity or to satisfy what they're trying to do. Right. So there's a difference between criticism and critical feedback. And I think that it's important to notice that difference. Because in other threads, you were having really amazing conversations about how important that critical feedback is for the children. And that is accurate, but it is important to note that there is a difference between criticism and critical feedback. And I think that creating classrooms and cultures where we understand the difference is really important. And I think I diverged pretty far off of my story there. But I think it's a great example of just thinking about all of the different people and curiosities and desires to know more that came together to create a rover that would literally fly to another planet, land there, and take pictures. There's so many different people along that trajectory that had different curiosities about different things, that operated in the circle phase, that operated in the triangle phase, that ended up in the square phase with peers, that went back and then came back around and ended up in the design thinking phase after they got through all of that, and even layered those frameworks on top of each other. So the point of it all is to say that these frameworks are here as tools. And even as you're going through them, as you're analyzing them and trying to understand them and wrap your head around them and feeling like maybe you're missing a beat or it's not resonating with you, or maybe one cycle or framework is resonating for you more than the other, really, that's all fantastic. It's all normal and part of the process, because these frameworks are meant to be tools for you to use to examine and observe and understand what's happening for the children in your classroom, for your peers as you move forward in creating curriculum together, and to use as tools to help you if you get stuck. So maybe you notice that children are in a circle phase for a while, or maybe you notice that children are kind of missing that empathy piece when they're trying to work on a project together and not really understanding what the other person is trying to do when they're trying to do two different things. Um, it's it's tools in your toolbox that you can pull out and say, hey, this piece might work here to help us move this along in a more efficient manner than where we're at right now. And it takes time to learn how to use these tools. So I wanted to just share that story and give you a little bit of perspective. And again, even with that story, we come back to this conversation that we started in our synchronous Zoom class on time. A big conversation that comes up is, I want to offer more time to my kids to explore in the circle phase. I want to offer my students more time to do this or that. And sometimes we're very limited on that time. And so thinking about time kind of in a larger picture, and how you want to use that time in the spaces and the times that you're provided is something that's really important to reflect on. I am going to move forward from there, and give you a quick screenshot. Not a screenshot. I'm going to share my screen with you for the science nuggets. And I'm sharing these, again, they're not required, but I think the more tools you have in your toolbox, the better. And again, a lot of them are videos that you can watch and just kind of reflect on and think about the readings and the resources and the videos that you've already watched and read for the course, and think about how they tie in, how they're related, how they expand upon what you've learned. And I just wanted to go through them a little bit with you. So this first one here, Life Saving Scientific Tools Made of Paper. This was one I was going to share with you in our meeting that we had, but we ran out of time because we were having such a fabulous conversation. And I think this is a really, really great example of design thinking as well. It had a theme of paper, and I loved the theme that it came with, but it's also a really, really, really great example of design thinking in action, and specifically in places where traditional scientific tools and materials are not available. My phone just dinged at you. So this is a really, really great one to watch when you have a moment. This is one that I also love too. This next one, Math is a Sense by Eddie Wu. I think that he gives a really great perspective on math generally. He's pretty funny to listen to, and he really hones in on math and patterning and symmetry and the beauty in it, and tying it to nature. And I think it's a fabulous video. And I ordered this differently. So the first one is one that I was going to share in our meeting, and then I stuck this math one in between, because this next one that's about paper, Stories Cut from Paper by Beatrice Coron. I had a Beatrice. I don't know if it's Beatrice or Beatrice, but I'll say Beatrice. That one is beautiful, but the reason why I put it after Math is a Sense by Eddie Wu is because Eddie Wu talks a lot about patterning and symmetry in mathematics. And when you look at the art created in stories cut from paper. There's so much pattern and symmetry in it, and it really kind of highlights the math that is embedded in with the art. And in my brain, I think they flow together. That one is really, really beautiful and is an artist talking about her art. So it ties in with the math and connects everything together. This next one is an interview with Gutierrez and Liboiron discussing the Peace Living Mathematics. I threw it in there just as an additive to the article we read several weeks ago. I did add a trigger warning there for you. And these next few you may or may not be familiar with, but I like to revisit them and do some comparisons. So Mark Rober is an engineer who got very bored during the pandemic and wanted to do some bird watching. And turns out that squirrels were far more interesting. So these videos are super fun. He's entertaining. The squirrels are fabulous. And he throws a lot of information and science on science and physics in there, and engineering as well. So those are super fun watches. But what's great is I added in the next two, which are Kane's Arcade, the original one, and Kane's Arcade 2, which is a follow-up to what happened after the first one went a little bit viral. They're both fabulous threads to follow. But what I really liked is going back to it and thinking about it through the lens of Bosogi, making through the lens of culture and power, and thinking about the different trajectories, and thinking about Dale Doherty's We Are All Makers, and thinking about the gatekeeping, and thinking about the differences in maker spaces, where Mark Rober went in this very, very specific direction and eventually ended up creating engineering kits that he sells, versus Kane's Arcade, which is about a little boy who created an arcade in his dad's auto garage out of cardboard, and a documentary filmmaker who came in and made his arcade go viral, and how that spurred a movement in engineering with found materials at home, and really got a lot of people, I think globally, if I'm remembering correctly, involved in making without requiring any money invested at all. So I think these are really great. Oh, I didn't want to do that. Really great examples of kind of seeing it through that lens. Moving on to this week. I'm forgetting, there they are. One of your articles was Beth Van Meederen and Betty Zan, and they refer to a Ramson Pathways project that they did. And so I included some links to those videos and sublinks for you there, in case you wanted to do a little bit more digging into the Ramson Pathways work that they did. And this is Elementaries Engineering, which is their website about that. And the alternative design process that they refer to, which is the engineering design process, which is what I first learned about engineering with, is here. This is the Ask, Imagine, Plan, Create, and Improve, which is what I'm familiar with as well. And this is kind of in line with the design thinking process that you just reviewed last week. And in the video on robotics, she talks a little bit about Strandbeest by Theo Jensen, and it's mentioned very, very briefly, but this is a very, very cool art that Theo Jensen creates. And so I included a YouTube video here that shows a little bit more about his giant moving sculptures that he creates. So this is all just extra fun stuff for you to save somewhere, watch when it's convenient for you, and enjoy or pull out when um, you think it's relevant to something that you're doing in your classrooms. Again, I'm working on your hands-on experience and your documentation, and I will be back later this week with another video to follow up on any comments or responses to cycle 2, just to round it out. But you are going to be reading and responding to cycle 3 this week, which is the scientific method, which again is a cycle that is different than what you're used to or what you remember. So I hope you enjoy going through all of the reading and the resources and videos that we have for this week. If you have any questions, let me know. I know a few of you have emailed me, and if anything comes up for you, just go ahead and shoot me an email and we'll work it out. Right. Again, thank you for your patience and your understanding and life that happens. And I apologize for not getting back to you sooner. I hope I didn't ramble for too long. And I hope that wherever you are, hold on, I'll stop sharing so you can see me. I hope that wherever you are, you have a lovely day or a lovely evening or a lovely anything. And take good care, and I'll see you again later this week. Take care.